Picture your evening routine. You climb into bed, drag the blanket up to your chin, and burn 40 minutes watching videos of dogs missing frisbees by inches. You get up twice for water you don't actually need. Eventually, somewhere around the third scroll-induced yawn, you drift off. It's a small, unremarkable ritual, and honestly, there's something quietly lovely about it. Now strip all that away. No blanket, no phone, no mattress, no four walls holding the world at bay, no kitchen to wander into out of habit. Instead, you're crouched in a forest at the edge of a fire, wrapped in a stiff hide, listening to something heavy shifting to the undergrowth 30 feet off. That was an ordinary Tuesday for the people who came before us. And here's the question almost nobody bothers to ask. What did they actually do once the sun disappeared? When the light died completely? When the predators that had been dozing all day started to stir, and your entire survival kit consisted of a chipped stone and stubborn hope? What exactly was the plan? Did they sleep straight through? Did they sit up, staring into nothing, bracing for whatever might come, like some Stone Age version of a person refreshing a delivery tracker at midnight? We spend roughly a third of our lives unconscious, and yet we almost never stop to consider how wildly different that experience was for nearly the entirety of human existence. The real answer turns out to be stranger, richer, and far more recognizably human than most people would guess. There's a reason this question rarely comes up. We tend to think of the past as a slower, dimmer version of the present, as if our ancestors simply pressed pause on existence the moment the light disappeared. It's an easy assumption to make when your own night consists of charging cables, motion sensor lights, and a door that locks with a satisfying click. But that assumption erases an enormous chunk of the human story, one that shaped how we bond with each other, how we tell stories, how we sleep, and even how we think about the sky over our heads. Rewind the clock past civilization, past tools worth naming, past even the reliable use of fire, and early humans were up against one blunt, unforgiving fact. Roughly half of every day happened in total darkness. Not the mild darkness of a bedroom with the blinds shut. Not, I misplaced my phone, and now I'm feeling my way to the bathroom darkness. Real darkness. The kind where your hand vanishes an inch from your own eyes, where a single snapping branch could mean the end of your story. And that blackness was not empty. It was hunting season. Lions, hyenas, leopards, saber-toothed cats. Nearly every apex predator of that era was built to work at twilight or through the night, which meant that the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, early humans quietly slid down the food chain, from hunter potential meal for something with vastly superior night vision. There was no need to check a forecast. The outlook was always the same, dark, with a strong chance of becoming dinner. So people adapted. They clustered together. They sought out elevation, enclosure, anything defensible. They let the terrain itself do part of the work. Caves became prime real estate, not for their charming lack of sunlight and perpetual damp, but because a cave typically offers a single point of entry. Put your back against stone, and you know with certainty which direction danger has to come from. It was, in effect, the first home security system ever devised, and it worked. No key cards required, which was fortunate, since leopards have never shown much aptitude for key cards either. Entire groups packed into these spaces together, close enough to trade body heat, close enough to hear one another's breathing shift in sleep, close enough that any disturbance would be noticed almost instantly. It wasn't comfort in any modern sense of the word, but there was a very real form of protection built into numbers. With enough people sleeping nearby, someone was always a lighter sleeper. Someone always stirred at the wrong sound. A kind of watch was being kept, whether anyone had agreed to it or not. Then, somewhere around 400,000 years ago, everything shifted. Fire changed the entire equation. From a survival standpoint, fire does something close to magic. It provides warmth. It allows food to be cooked, which massively improves how much nutrition the body can actually extract. But the deeper shift was psychological. Fire drew a boundary, a ring of light that separated people from the dark, a wall that had no physical substance, and yet functioned as one anyway. Most large predators avoid crossing into firelight, not because flame injures them, but because their entire hunting instinct is calibrated for darkness, and an open flame is a disruption their senses aren't built to process. Sitting beside a fire didn't make early humans stronger or faster. It made them safer simply by existing inside a circle of light. And here's the part that rarely gets the attention it deserves. Fire didn't just keep predators at bay. It reshaped what human beings became. Think about what a fire actually allows you to do. You can't get productive work done by it in any modern sense. You can't read by it, write by it, or fire off a passive-aggressive message to a colleague. What you can do is sit still, look at the people around you, and be genuinely present with them in a way that daylight activity rarely allows. Anthropologists studying present-day hunter-gatherer communities, the Jew/Hoansi of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, have documented something striking. Daytime conversation in these groups is almost entirely practical. Coordinating who's hunting where, what needs gathering, the ancient version of a status meeting. Nighttime conversation is a different animal entirely. Around the fire, people tell stories, long, layered, emotionally complex stories about ancestors, about how the world came to be, about courage and generosity, and what it means to be someone worth trusting. Roughly 80% of nighttime conversation in these communities consists of storytelling, compared to only about 6% during daylight hours. Sit with that for a second. Logistics by day, mythology by night, a pattern repeated every single evening for tens of thousands of years. Human beings gathered around flame and narrated existence to one another. It's the exact same impulse driving streaming platforms, novels, and every film ever made. The attempt to make sense of being alive through character, conflict, and consequence. The fire was the screen. The storyteller was the whole production. And this mattered enormously, because stories are the mechanism by which culture replicates itself. They carry values forward, preserve history, and construct identity across generations. All without writing, without books, without any external storage device whatsoever. The nightly fireside story was, in a very real sense, the hard drive of early human civilization. Fire may not only have kept our ancestors alive, it may have been the single greatest catalyst behind language, empathy, cultural memory, and the deep social bonds that define us. Sitting in the dark, telling each other stories, might be the very reason we became a species capable of imagining things that don't yet exist. Not a bad achievement for a group of people dressed in animal hide. And it's worth pausing on just how strange this trait actually is when you flip it around. During the day, hunting and gathering demanded sharp attention to the immediate world. Tracks, weather, distance, danger. At night, with the immediate world reduced to a small circle of orange light, the mind had nowhere to go but inward and outward at once. Inward toward memory and meaning, outward toward the people sitting shoulder to shoulder. That combination, physical safety paired with unstructured time and a rapt audience, may be one of the rarest conditions in the natural world. Most animals that gather in groups for warmth or protection don't spend that time exchanging elaborate symbolic narratives about their ancestors. Humans apparently couldn't help themselves. Now, on to sleep itself, because this is where things get genuinely surprising, and it might permanently change how you feel about waking up at 3 a.m. Most of us carry an unspoken assumption. Proper, healthy sleep means 8 uninterrupted hours in a single continuous block. Wake up at 3 a.m. and lie there unable to drift back off. And the instinct is to assume something has malfunctioned. Out comes a phone, and goes a search query, and by 4 a.m. you've self-diagnosed 3 disorders and a vitamin deficiency you've never heard of. Here's the twist. That whole assumption may be a fairly recent historical invention. A historian named A. Roger Kirch spent years combing through diaries, court records, medical texts, and household accounts, and what he uncovered was remarkable. For the majority of human history, probably back to the medieval period, and very likely much further, people didn't sleep in one continuous stretch. They slept in 2. It was known as first sleep and second sleep. People would retire a couple of hours after nightfall, sleep 3 or 4 hours, then wake naturally, not startled, not distressed, simply surface in the way you might rise gently out of a pleasant dream. They'd remain awake for an hour or 2 before settling back down until morning. This isn't a fringe theory. It's documented with striking consistency across cultures and centuries. References to the 2 sleeps appear as far back as Homer. Roman writers mentioned it as offhandedly as we'd mention lunch. Medieval texts are full of it. One 16th century French physician reportedly suggested couples try conceiving during the gap between sleeps, reasoning that people were calmer and more receptive during that window. Court documents and household ledgers casually reference tasks completed in that middle stretch of night, treated as nothing unusual. Even the old phrase, a watch in the night, which shows up throughout scripture and historical texts, is often assumed to describe soldiers on guard duty. Sometimes it did, but frequently, it simply meant the ordinary interval between the two sleeps, when regular people were awake in the dark for entirely mundane reasons. And what filled that window? Nearly everything. People prayed. In many spiritual traditions, the hush between midnight and dawn was considered the most sacred stretch of time, when the world grew still and felt closest to the divine. People reflected on their dreams, which were treated as far more meaningful and information-rich than we generally treat them today. People had sex, since the body was already warm and relaxed, and there was nowhere else pressing to be. People tended the fire, feeding it fresh fuel to survive the coldest hours. Farmers checked on animals. Mothers nursed infants. In towns, some residents simply visited neighbors, walking the dark streets between the two sleeps as though it were the most unremarkable thing in the world. Because none of this was insomnia. None of it was disorder. It was simply the night unfolding the way it always had, in phases. The collapse of this two-part sleep pattern almost certainly traces back to artificial lighting. Once interiors could stay brightly lit deep into the evening, first with gas, then electricity, bedtimes crept later and later, total sleep time compressed, and the natural gap between the two sleeps got squeezed out of existence entirely. Suddenly, waking in the night felt like a glitch rather than an ancient rhythm doing exactly what it was designed to do. So if you ever surface at 3 a.m. feeling oddly calm and clear-headed, lying there thinking through your life for an hour before drifting peacefully back under, take heart. You're not broken. You're not anxious. There's nothing wrong developing in your sleep architecture. You are, quite literally, behaving like a prehistoric human. Your body simply remembered something it was never meant to forget. It's worth sitting with how much anxiety gets manufactured purely by the expectation itself. A person who wakes at 3 a.m. and assumes it's normal will usually drift back to sleep within the hour, calm and unbothered. A person who wakes at 3 a.m. and assumes it's a symptom will often lie there with a racing pulse, and that stress response is far more likely to keep them awake than the waking itself ever was. In other words, the discomfort so many people associate with middle-of-the-night wakefulness may have less to do with biology and more to do with a few centuries of artificial lighting quietly rewriting our expectations about what normal sleep is supposed to look like. Let's push even further back, because the deeper you dig into how ancient people actually managed sleep, the more genuinely impressive it becomes. Early Homo sapiens and the hominid species before them had no beds in any recognizable sense. But they also weren't simply collapsing onto bare stone and hoping things worked out. The reality was considerably more deliberate. Archaeological work at sites such as Border Cave in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, indicates that as far back as 200,000 years ago, people were building intentional sleeping platforms, layered arrangement of grass, leaves, and specifically chosen plant material, not haphazard bedding. And here's the detail that elevates this from interesting to remarkable. Beneath those layers, researchers discovered ash deliberately spread rather than accidental residue from a nearby fire. Why bother? Because ash repels insects, ticks, mites, fleas, the very things that bite you through the night and can spread disease. Someone, roughly 200,000 years ago, connected an itchy night to the ash from their fire, tested the theory, confirmed it worked, and then passed that knowledge on to others. That is, functionally, the scientific method, running inside a prehistoric mind, applied to the very practical problem of getting a decent night's rest. These weren't people just barely scraping by until dawn. They were actively engineering their comfort, solving problems methodically with whatever materials were on hand, refining their approach through observation. In colder regions, Ice Age Europe, Central Asia during brutal winters, the dominant threat shifted from bugs to cold itself. Temperatures could plunge low enough to kill an exposed person within hours. The solution was communal sleeping, bodies pressed together as a kind of living insulation. This wasn't merely social bonding. It was applied thermodynamics. More bodies in a confined space meant a higher shared temperature, which meant survival. Researchers also suspect that natural variation in how deeply different individuals sleep may itself have been an evolutionary advantage. A group in which everyone sank into deep, unbroken sleep was a vulnerable group. A group with spread of sleep depths effectively had built-in rotating sentries, without anyone having to volunteer for the miserable job of a deliberate night watch. Evolution, it turns out, is remarkably economical, and the night wasn't only about defense and rest. For nearly every ancient culture on Earth, it was also the most spiritually charged span of the entire day. That makes a certain intuitive sense. The sun, the source of visibility, warmth, and life itself, appear to die each evening, sinking beneath the horizon. In countless ancient cosmologies, it was believed to descend into an underworld and fight its way back. Every sunrise was treated as a victory reclaimed. Every night was a vigil held in its honor. The ancient Maya built entire calendrical systems around celestial movements only visible after dark. Their cities, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Palenque, were architecturally aligned with specific stars and planets. The observatory at Chichen Itza was engineered to track Venus with striking precision. Venus, visible only at dawn and dusk, was linked to Kukulkan and consulted before decisions about warfare. The night sky wasn't decorative. It functioned as an intelligence system, part political, part military. Priests conducted rituals deep in the night specifically to ensure the sun completed its underworld passage and rose again. From a modern vantage point, this looks like mythology. From theirs, it was essential infrastructure maintenance. And since the sun kept rising, the correlation felt like undeniable proof that the work mattered. In ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, a dedicated class of scholar priests devoted themselves to interpreting the night sky for omens. Every unusual celestial event carried meaning. A comet signified something. A lunar eclipse carried a specific warning tied to the ruling king. Planetary movement dictated the right moments to go to war, to plant crops, to negotiate treaties. These weren't superstitions in any dismissive sense. They were serious, methodical attempts to detect patterns in the natural world and use them to guide decisions. The framework was flawed, but the underlying instinct was genuinely scientific. Polynesian navigators achieved something that, once you understand mechanics, is nearly impossible to believe was done without instruments. No compass, no sextant, no charts, no satellite guidance of any kind. And yet they crossed the largest ocean on the planet, covering thousands of miles in wooden outrigger canoes, locating tiny islands scattered across an expanse of water larger than every landmass on Earth combined. Much of this navigation happened at night. Navigators memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of individual stars across different seasons and latitudes. They read ocean swells, distinguishing different currents by feel alone, even when the swell's point of origin was invisible. They tracked bird flight patterns, since certain species head toward land each evening. They studied cloud formations that tend to gather above islands. They read water temperature through their hands and feet. The night sky functioned as their navigation system, and in several respects it was more sophisticated than anything humans carried before satellite positioning existed. These were people who had converted darkness into pure expertise, transforming the night sky into a library they could read as fluently as text. One more detail that consistently lands hard. Iron Age metalworkers in what is now Zimbabwe, active roughly between 200 CE and 1900 CE, deliberately chose to fire their forges after dark. This wasn't tradition for its own sake. Daylight washes out the subtle color shifts that hot metal goes through, and those color changes tell a smith exactly what temperature the metal has reached. Red, orange, yellow, white, each shade signals a precise working state. At night, those colors stood out with total clarity against the dark. Darkness became a precision instrument. In ancient Pakistan, at Mohenjo-Daro, one of the earliest true urban civilizations, over 4,000 years old, sanitation workers handled waste collection specifically after dark, working alongside a genuinely sophisticated drainage system, timed deliberately to preserve quality of life for everyone else in the city. That's scheduling. That's logistics. That's, functionally, a night shift. In Bronze Age Oman, farmers irrigated fields under cover at night to minimize evaporation, a smart water conservation strategy in an arid climate, arrive at purely through careful observation. And in cold northern Europe, the Vikings burned fish oil and whale fat in lamps to light their longhouses through winter nights that in Scandinavia can stretch 18 to 20 hours. They didn't retreat from the darkness. They built their own light sources and kept working, socializing, and living straight through it. So let's pull all of this together, because there's a genuine conclusion here, not just a pile of curious facts. When people picture what ancient humans did at night, the image tend to be small and fearful, huddled bodies on cold stone, passively waiting out the hours until morning, enduring the dark rather than actually living inside it. Night gets imagined as absence, as a gap between meaningful days, a stretch when nothing counted. But that picture has it exactly backwards. The night was when humans first told the stories that eventually became culture, when they slept in two natural phases and rose in the middle to think, to pray, to connect with one another, when they held each other close against cold that would otherwise have killed them outright, when priests scanned the sky for messages from something greater than themselves, when navigators crossed the widest ocean on Earth guided only by starlight, swell, and instinct, when metalworkers used darkness to see more precisely than daylight ever allowed, when farmers watered their crops by moonlight to outsmart evaporation, when the Maya made offerings to coax the sun back out of the underworld, and every single morning, the sun on at its end of the deal, the night was never empty. It was full, a distinct world with its own logic, demanding its own set of skills, generating its own forms of meaning. And it was a world that human beings explored, understood, and made entirely their own across hundreds of thousands of years. We eventually traded most of that away for electric light, and to be fair, it was worth it. Running water, antibiotics, the internet, and conveniently pre-sliced cheese are not small gains. The modern world has real, tangible advantages. But something has genuinely been lost in how completely we've erased the line between day and night, how thoroughly we've pushed back the dark, how little most of us now understand about the sky overhead or the natural rhythms our own bodies still carry, even when we never give them a chance to express themselves. The circle around the fire, the stories told in shared darkness, the two-part sleep with its strange, lucid middle hour, the stars used as a map, a calendar, a sacred record, the simple act of lying awake deep in the night with nothing urgent to do but exist. So the next time you find yourself awake at 3 a.m., thoughts moving clearly and calmly through your mind like water over stone, resist the urge to panic. Don't reach for the phone. Don't let the anxiety spiral start. Just lie there in the quiet for a while. Think through whatever needs thinking. Be awake the way the people before you were awake. Quietly, completely, in the middle of a night that has always, in some sense, belonged to you. You aren't malfunctioning. You're remembering. And maybe that's the real takeaway buried underneath all the archaeology and anthropology and half-forgotten sleep habits. The night was never the enemy our modern instincts assume it was. It was a teacher, a workshop, a sanctuary, and a stage, all wrapped into the same handful of dark hours that repeated, unbroken, every single day of human existence for hundreds of thousands of years. We've since rebuilt our relationship with darkness almost entirely around avoiding it, filling it with light, noise, and screens rather than sitting inside it the way our ancestors so often did. There's nothing wrong with that choice. But every so often, when the power flickers off, or the phone dies, or you simply find yourself lying awake in the small hours with nowhere urgent to be, it might be worth letting the old rhythm take over for a little while. Not because the modern world got it wrong, but because some part of you still remembers what the dark used to mean, and that memory, however faint, is still worth listening to